I'm Timothy McNeil, professor in the UC Davis Department of Design. I'm also director of the UC Davis Design Museum. Before I start this evening's proceedings, let's please take a moment to acknowledge the land on which we are gathered. For thousands of years, this land has been the home of the Patwin people. Today, there are 3 federally recognized Patwin tribes: Kachi-Dihi, Band of Wintun Indians of the Calusa Indian community, Tletzel-Dehi, Wintun Nation, and Yoche-Dehi, Wintun Nation. The Patwin people have remained committed to the stewardship of this land over many centuries. It has been cherished and protected as elders have instructed the young through generations. We are honored and grateful to be here today on their traditional lands. Before we begin, can I ask that everyone silence their mobile devices and just note the 2 emergency exits that are in the room? Thank you. The Design Museum's current exhibition, Still Racism in America, a Retrospective in Cartoons, features original artworks on loan from the Billy Island Cartoon Library and Museum at The Ohio State University and is co-curated by Barbara Brandon-Croft and Tara Nakashima Donahue, and at the UC Davis campus by Professor Darnel Degand from the School of Education. Darnel and I are welcoming you this evening, and we'll kind of be hosting this event and sort of being the sort of compares. Darnel first approached me about hosting this exhibition at the museum in about fall of 2022. Both the exhibition and event are examples of what great collaboration looks like at UC Davis, and the benefits it brings in terms of new research, public engaged scholarship, and making community events like this one. Many meetings, discussions, and logistics later, I hope Darnel still agrees that it was worth it. Little did he know what he was getting into. I wish to sincerely thank the many people and the co-sponsors who made this exhibition event possible. Many are listed up behind me on the screen. And if you've been over to the exhibition, you'll see the wonderful newspaper spread on the wall, which has everyone credited there as well. But thanks to everyone who's been involved. Please note that the museum will be open and there will be a reception after we conclude here. I would also like to acknowledge the UC Davis College of Letters and Science for supporting the UC Davis Design Museum in this event. And with that, please welcome Dean Estela Atequana to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Okay. Thank you, Tim. So good evening, and thank you for joining us at this event featuring 3 distinguished speakers whose work coincides with the exhibition Still Racism in America, a Retrospective in Cartoons at the UC Davis Design Museum. My name is Estela Atequana, and I'm the Dean of the College of Letters and Science, of which the Design Museum is a part of. Our college is the largest college on campus, and our academic programs span the physical sciences and mathematics, social sciences, the humanities, and the arts. The arts are a core part of our identity in the college, and the Design Museum is a key part of an arts hub that includes our college's design and art departments and the Cuban Museum of Native American Art that extends to the broader UC Davis arts community, including the Maria Menendez Shrem Museum and the Mondavi Center for the Arts. This pioneering work, showcased here today by the late Brumsic Brandon Jr. and his daughter, Barbara Brandon-Croft, is a provocative work that finds a kindred home in our UC Davis arts community. To bring this work to our campus, the Design Museum is very much strengthening our roots and helping to drive us into the future. It is now my distinct honor to introduce the Chancellor of UC Davis, Gary S. May. Chancellor May is a national leader in engineering, in education, and in promoting diversity at institutions of higher education. He has been recognized by President Obama among many others, for these efforts. Under his leadership, the Chancellor's colloquia have provided deep and stimulating conversations for our campus and community. Today's gathering is certain to continue that tradition. So please join me in welcoming to the stage the 7th Chancellor of UC Davis, Gary S. May.
Thank you so much, Dean Atakwana. Welcome, everyone. It's good to be here with you. Let's welcome to the School of Education's Expanding Equity in Education series and the opening of this powerful exhibit at the UC Davis Design Museum. I've been looking forward to this event since Barbara Brandon-Croft was a guest at my Chancellor's Colloquium last spring. We got to know each other and have dinner, and it was a very delightful experience. We talked about her background, the Black cartoonists who paved the way for her, and the impact of comics as a storytelling device. It's no secret that I am a longtime fan of comic books. If you've been on this campus, you know that. My collection now stands at about 14,000, and I'm still buying them. And Michelle is telling me where I can't put them. I've always appreciated comic books and read comic strips for their vibrancy and accessibility. Some might focus on superhero powers or a fantastic vision of the future. Others are meant to make us chuckle, and some comics make us both laugh and think critically while they address social issues of the day, such as race relations and politics. That's especially true of the work of Barbara Brandon-Croft and Brumsic Brandon, Jr. This exhibit, Still Racism in America, a retrospective in cartoons, explores the most pressing topic of our times in their signature artistic styles. Barbara comes from a family of cartoonists. Her late father, Brumsic Brandon, Jr., was the creator of Luther, which was among the first comic strips to feature a Black lead character. In this exhibit, you'll see a portfolio of work from both father and daughter. This aspect is especially poignant, especially a girl dad like me. I like to have daughters. Here we get a direct window into the creative and shared influences behind this family of comic pioneers. Brumsic Brandon Jr. was a master of presenting satire with an easygoing touch. It wasn't the kind of work that came off as confrontational or in your face, but through the grace of his pen and the sharpness of his humor, his topical fare still packed a punch. His comics were a defining feature of the Black press for decades. In this body of work, you see his background as an artist, an educator, and a civil rights activist shine through. No wonder that some of his original works were collected by the Library of Congress. Like her father, Barbara Brandon-Croft is also a trailblazer in the world of comics. She was the first Black woman in the country to be syndicated in mainstream newspapers. Her comic strip, Where I'm Coming From, debuted in the Detroit Free Press in 1989 and went on to be syndicated in more than 60 newspapers, including the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, where I read it for many years. This strip focuses on the perspective of Black women, with a cast of characters based on her real-life friends. I appreciate the sense of community that's conveyed in Where I'm Coming From. You get the feeling of a true sisterhood as the characters discuss issues like single parenting, money issues, hair, and what it means to be a strong Black woman. Barbara's work is brilliant in the way it speaks to truth to power in a comic strip setting. Her comics have tackled such weighty issues as racial profiling, school shootings, and sexism, all with a minimalist cartooning style that intrigues the eyes and the mind. This exhibition is bound to spark a dialogue and leave you inspired by its creativity and its thoughtfulness. And I know you'll be captivated to hear directly from Barbara Brandon-Croft later this evening. But first, we'll hear from Dr. Enrique García from Middlebury College in Vermont. Dr. Garcia is a professor of Hispanic Visual Culture who focuses on cinema and comics. Must be a good guy. One of his courses focuses on Hispanic Latinx superhero parodies, which is perhaps the only course of its kind in the country. Through Dr. Garcia, we will gain an even deeper insight into the themes of comics, identity, and representation that are all hallmarks of this exhibit. So before we introduce our guests, I'd like to just welcome Professor Danny Martinez. He will share a brief history of the School of Education's Expanding Equity in Education series. Enjoy the evening. Danny?
Thank you, Chancellor May, and thank you all for joining us today. My name is Danny C. Martinez. I'm a faculty member in the School of Education and here to just give you a very brief history of this speaker series. The Expanding Equity in Educational Research Speaker Series began in the 2019-2020 academic year. We started off strong with a new dean who wanted to create a new speaker series. And the history goes that our first guest got ill and couldn't make it, the first one, so we had to cancel that one. And we had our second guest, Dr. Enrique García and Dr. Nolan Cabrera, and right after they visited us with amazing presentations around the role of race in higher education research, we were all shut down by the pandemic soon after. So we had a series of speakers join us online, and I believe this is our third in-person speaker series since we returned back. And it's exciting to think about today's panel of guests because the goal of the Expanding Equity in Educational Research was really to get our School of Education community, our students, faculty, we often have community members, our undergraduates, graduate students, to come together and listen to folks who are going to get us to think differently about problems, issues, and joys that we find within education broadly. Our speakers are often encouraging us to do this, to take this back and to think about our own research, our own teaching, encouraging us to ask different questions, encouraging us to imagine differently, and to ask questions not yet asked. So I want to thank my colleague, Dr. Darnel Degand, for bringing and organizing this panel that surely does those things for us today. And highlighting the role of comics in expanding and shifting and opening how we think about education and the role of comics in everyday learning experiences, not just in the classrooms, but those beyond, those that we can have in where we experience joy at home or alone when we're reading comics, or we take the ideas like I sure will today after visiting the exhibit and share them with others and bring others to this community space. So thank you and welcome again to the Expanding Equity in Educational Research Speaker Series. It's my pleasure to introduce our interim dean in the School of Education, Dr. Cynthia Carter-Ching.
Thanks, Danny, for that history. Welcome, everyone, to this exciting event. I'm so happy to be able to welcome you all this evening on behalf of the School of Education as its interim dean this year, a job I get to give up in June. I'm especially excited about the collaboration this evening, and it represents between the School of Education and the Design Museum to bring this wonderful exhibit and set of scholars to our campus. You know, there's a long history of connection between education and the arts, but we perhaps haven't embodied that connection at UC Davis as much as we could. And so maybe this event will serve as a catalyst for that change. Certainly, if you visit the exhibit, you'll see that there is a deep connection between education and this art. So we in the School of Education live in the complex history of education as both an attempt to address racism and also as a place where it has been and sometimes is still perpetuated. Illustrating the potential, however, I'm quoting former President Barack Obama, who said, "The future belongs to young people with an education and an imagination to create." So in our school, we focus a lot on the education part, right? We have the largest undergraduate minor on campus. We train and certify K-12 teachers in our post-baccalaureate credential program. Many of those teachers then stay for their masters. We grow educational leaders in K-12 and higher ed through our doctorate in leadership. And we produce the next generation of scholars and researchers in education through our PhD. But imagination to create is the clear and obvious domain of the arts. Certainly, art asks questions and presents answers, but it also engages our emotions and our imaginations. And we need both sides of that equation to create the future. I'm happy to introduce one of our speakers this evening, whose work crosses multiple boundaries and asks meaningful questions about representation and bias in comics. Enrique García is professor of Hispanic Visual Culture at Middlebury College in Vermont. He holds a BA from the University of Puerto Rico, may I guess, and a PhD in comparative literature from the University of Massachusetts Amherst. His research focuses on international Hispanic Latinx genre cinema and comic books. So in the presentation he will share with us today, Enrique García explores the various ways in which Eurocentric imperialism and white supremacy ideas ingrained into early comic narratives in the U.S. had influenced some of the most important comic book creators from around the world. In an attempt to tackle the question of how we can address the value and unforgivable biases in comic books, Professor Garcia will examine some of the racist, misogynist, and classist tropes found in otherwise progressive and anti-racist texts. He will show how our intellectual assessment of these texts is key to ensuring that the future of the global comic book industry can evolve from oppressive hegemonic ideologies to a more egalitarian and inclusive space. At this time, please join me in welcoming Professor Enrique Garcia. Thank you.
First, I want to thank you for inviting me here. It's my first time I'm presenting in California. I'm usually stuck in New England, so I'm excited to share my studies with you. Before I begin talking, I wanted to give you an interesting anecdote that is related to my daughters. We live in Vermont. You know Vermont, the state of Bernie Sanders, you know. But it's also a state that is 97% white, you know. So even though the state is progressive, you know, we don't, the education system doesn't have that many BIPOC students usually in the schools. And so one day my daughters came back from school and they were horrified about the book they read in class. And they were saying, oh, the teacher in English, we read a book and the bad guy had slaves. And so I was like, oh, was he the main character? And they were like, yeah, and it was terrible. He had slaves and he mistreated the slave characters. And then I was like, what book is this? And then they're like, oh, then he got stuck in an island. And then he had adventures with another Aboriginal character. And then I'm like, is that Robinson Crusoe? So then they're like, yeah, that one. So in a way, my daughters at 10, they somehow were reading Robinson Crusoe in a different way than the teacher was doing. Like they actually saw that the main character was the bad guy because he had slaves. And then I was like, oh yeah, because I had taught them about how slavery is bad. And I have showed them the movies and the books, but not everyone has that experience. So then I was telling my daughters, well, the problem is not reading Robinson Crusoe. I mean, that's an important book, kind of like in the canon of literature. The problem is that the teacher didn't address the fact that he owned slaves. So that was the problem. You know, like that wasn't discussed in the classroom, and that's why they were upset. Because they were like, why is this character here doing this and nobody's saying anything about it? And so I was proud of them because they were aware of it, but at the same time I realized that, I realized that, one moment, I just had to put my timer. I realized that not everyone has this experience. Not everyone has a father that is a professor teaching them race theory, etc. And that's why a lot of these things had to be taught in school. Not necessarily in the university, because not everyone has access to higher education. It has to be also done in elementary schools. And that's what I thought it was important to discuss this in this setting with education. So before I continue, I have to give you a trigger warning that we'll be seeing some images that are controversial. I didn't choose the worst ones because I didn't want to kind of like inflict like the pain, but I wanted to show you certain elements that used to appear in comics, and so this is the original cover. Now, before I continue, one of the things that I'm grateful personally is that the reason I was able to evolve as a person is because I went to grad school. I took classes in gender studies, in black studies, disability studies, and I became self-aware about my own deficiencies that have been acquired through the system, the education system, family, school, etc. And so I wish everyone has that experience, but not everyone has that experience. And so that's how my research began to develop, and I began to explore how race is constructed around the world, especially in the comic books, because comic books target young children. And so sometimes people don't pay attention to this, and they're like, oh, it's not literature, it's not novels, etc. But a lot of the ideology that is developed in kids begins with the comic books. So sometimes my students get horrified when they read some of the old racist comic books, and then they're like, oh, yeah, this is terrible. And then I said, I know, but what if nobody's there telling them that this racism that is in the comic books is terrible? That means that the kid will acquire these concepts. And that's why the problem that my daughters had with the Robinson Crusoe book is that the teacher wasn't addressing slavery. It's not the text itself, it's that you have to also deconstruct that. So one of the problems that we have in the world, I think that one of the issues we have is that we sometimes forget how the 19th century was key in developing a lot of the white supremacy ideas. Like a lot of the concept of Eurocentric culture, imperialism, all of that is in the curriculum, which is why we're reading Robinson Crusoe in Vermont, okay? And so sometimes we don't take that seriously, and then we don't realize how those narratives are kind of like promoted in the literary canon, and then everyone is reading, then all the writers begin to mimicking those problematic narratives. And so that's why we need to deconstruct them in a way. Now, one of the first things that I noticed when I was doing my research about Latin America, for example, was that the most famous English novels in Latin America, do you know which ones were they? Tarzan novels. Tarzan novels. Have you read Tarzan novels recently? I have read them for my research, and it's interesting because Edgar Rice Burroughs is a good writer, like in terms of writing. It's just that the content is super racist. It's about eugenics, about conquering Africa, also about animalizing African people in a way, and so the content is very racist, but it's actually a bestseller. In fact, I can get all the Tarzan novels right now if I buy them in the internet. His company actually sells all the books in beautiful editions, so that content is still available. So here we have Tarzan. That's one of the covers that we find. Of course, we see him fighting some monkey. I don't know if you noticed that he's also protecting Jane, the white woman. And all those are like connotations of rape, no? Like the monkey wants the white woman, and so that's very problematic. Now, when I was looking in Latin America, I was surprised that Spain, Chile, Mexico, they all had Tarzan ripoffs. So they were actually saying, oh, we went into this market. Tarzan sells a lot of comic books, so let's just create our own Tarzan comic books. So, for example, this is in Spain. So this is kind of like a fake Tarzan. It's exactly like Tarzan, but with a different name. And it's published in Spanish, okay? And then we have, these are in Chile. These are also like adventures with white European men fighting animals and fighting African people, okay? So that's when you see that this imperialist ideology begins to be copied in the different countries, okay? And so if we see Mexico here, Mexico also had different type of Tarzan ripoffs, no? Not all of them take place in Africa. Some take place in India, some take place in Brazil, etc. But it's the same concept, no, of white supremacy that we see in there. So practically, a lot of these Latin American countries were learning about black culture through ripoff of Tarzan in a way. They weren't reading black texts, okay? And so I find that kind of sinister in a way. Now, have you read Donald Duck Adventures? Donald Duck, a lot of my students are always like, oh my God, Donald Duck, they're so cute. But if you read the comic books, they recreate a lot of the colonial attitudes of the time. So for example, Uncle Scrooge, which is the uncle that is there, that has a lot of money, he's always stealing resources from impoverished nations, no? So one of the adventures that we have here, this is a voodoo priest, okay? And so this voodoo priest wants vengeance on Uncle Scrooge. And so when you read the comic, actually it's very weird because Uncle Scrooge tells Donald Duck, oh, yeah, I remember that guy. We destroyed his village in Africa because we wanted to steal his resources. Yeah, I remember that I hired some European army and I crushed the entire village. And he's the hero, see what I mean? And so then the voodoo priest is sending a zombie to kill the dogs. And then Donald Duck says, oh, but it's not my fault, it's my uncle, which is kind of like the attitude people have today. It wasn't me, it's the people in the past. What is kind of interesting is that at the end, the little nephews, they offer money to the voodoo priest in exchange of the voodoo priest forgiving them for what the Uncle Scrooge did, which also is kind of controversial because it's this idea that you can just pay off that pain, no? And that's something that happens still in this day. So my point is that all of this is in the culture. These comics, for example, the Donald Duck comics are available. You can buy them in Barnes & Noble, etc. But no one is deconstructing this for the kid. Like any kid could read this now and not necessarily be aware that colonialism is now perceived as something bad in a way. So one moment. So what I wanted to give you an example is about how artists that are good. Here we have Will Eisner from the US and Yolanda Vargas Dulce from Mexico. These are legendary artists in their own country. And so even though their narratives are great and they're canonical, Will Eisner did a lot of great stuff in the 70s and Yolanda Vargas is kind of like the Walt Disney of Mexico, both of them have been tainted by the legacy of minstrel comics, okay? So it's something that we cannot ignore in their work. And so here we have the two controversial characters that they have, Ebony White, that appear in The Spirit in the US, and then Memín Pinguín, that appear in Mexico and written by Yolanda Vargas, okay? And so as you can see, the aesthetics are like of the kind of like minstrel comics from the 40s. I mean, these comics were published in the 40s. They have the exaggerated features. If you see the mother of Memín, she's kind of like a mommy figure, no, in a way. So that's why these particular drawings will be seen as offensive today, okay? Now, the Spirit comics, you can find them, but they're kind of like expensive to get. So little kids wouldn't be able to read them because each hardcover costs like $60, okay? The Memín comics are mainstream in Mexico. So you can get them anywhere. And that's the controversy sometimes because Ebony White has become more like something for scholars, while Memín is still read by kids in modern day Mexico. Now, I wanted to show you some examples with Ebony White. And so what is annoying about Ebony White is that he's the sidekick of the Spirit, which is the white character that we see in the pictures. And he, he's depicted like a fool in a way. And so the Spirit is always making fun of him, no? So it dehumanizes him in a way. The character is a hero. He's not bad, but he's not portrayed in a positive manner either. One thing that, I don't know if you notice here, is that the Spirit punches him all the time. So there is also like this comedic physical abuse on the black character, okay? And so that is kind of like difficult to, to enjoy in modern times, So that part is kind of outdated. Now, I will say that the difference between this racist character and the Mexican one is that for the American audience, the black character is a community that really exists in the US, So when you read Ebony White in the Spirit, there are other black characters. So he lives and there is a community, etc. So you see different type of black characters. In Memín, it's more like that the Mexican writer imported the problematic American aesthetics into Mexico, but he is the only black character that lives in Mexico. So when you see the comic, there are no other black characters, it's only the Memín character. So it has a different function. Now, when we see here Memín, one of the interesting things about Memín is that actually Memín is a good comic book about poor kids in Mexico. So if you are reading it as a poor children narrative, it's excellent. It's just that it has that black racist character that kind of like damages the dynamics of the comic book. But for example, as a Mexican writer, she actually is displaying how the rich white kid is being racist to Memín, but then the rich white racist kid is also prejudiced against the poor white kid, in a way. So then he's shown that he's affecting also the black character, but also the poor white Mexican character. And that's kind of like an interesting approach to displaying the racism. Now, when you see the humor in the comic book, one joke that I thought it was kind of interesting, but still problematic, is that when Memín goes to visit his rich friend, the racist white mother thinks that he's a monkey. So that's why she reacts and she's scared. But then you can see that he himself doesn't know that she's scared of him. So he's also running scared because she's like, oh, a monkey. And then she's like, oh, there's a monkey here. So he doesn't see himself as a monkey in a way. So that's kind of like an interesting device. I mean, it's still linked to a problematic racist concept, but there is some deconstruction there. And so you can see that he's sad because he's like, oh, this happened because I'm black. And they are assuming that, I'm like that. So if you compare both at the same time as comic books from the 40s, the Memín is kind of like more interesting than the other one, than from the US, that is obviously targeting black people more directly. Another interesting thing is that in Memín, the poor white people can be racist too. It's not only the rich people. So if you see the page in the left, one of the poor kids' father is being racist to Memín. So then that shows that, you could be racist either if you are poor white or a rich white. What is interesting is that in that particular scene, you can see that the poor white person doesn't have self-confidence. He's a drunk, and then he's using racism to enhance himself, which is something that people discuss sometimes when they're discussing race relations, and how the different classes perceive racism in a way. Now, another social aspect of this comic that is interesting is dealing also with alcohol and how people are drunk in the 1940s, which is kind of interesting again. And so that's why when I was reading the comic, I was like, okay, it has some racist stuff imported from the US. There are some things that are related to Mexico that are super interesting. Now, when this comic, because this comic is so important in Mexico, Memín, and it's still being read, there was a controversy in the 2000s because Mexico decided to put the character in the postal stamps. Oh, we love this character so much that we're going to put it in the postal stamps. So suddenly all these letters come from Mexico to the US with the minstrel character. And it created some havoc in the US. They were saying, Mexico, what are you doing? You're sending us racist material in the letters. So it's interesting because the Mexican audiences in the US, they were saying, what's happening? Memín is not racist. That's a great comic book. And then I was thinking, wait, I have read the comic book, and even though I find some stuff that is interesting in it, it has racist stuff. So you cannot say that either, no, that is not racist. So for example, I'm going to show you an example of a super racist joke in Meming, and I'm warning you because it's sort of offensive. There is one part that Meming goes to the circus, and then you can see that the monkey is attracted to Meming. Do you see? And so that's racist. You know, so I find kind of strange that some of the Mexican audience were accusing the Americans of not having read Meming, and then I'm like, no, I think you didn't read Meming. So both of them, you know, there were issues in those are the stamps. Those are the stamps that were coming to the U.S., and that it was shocking for the American audiences in the 50s. In the 2000s. Now, to be fair to Yolanda Vargas, what is interesting about her case, as you know, the comic book industry is not very women creator oriented. Like, it's very, very male centric, no? So one of the things that is important is that when I'm assessing her work, I'm like, okay, this comic is problematic. At the same time, she's one of the only women that were successful in the 1940s writing comic books. So how do I assess her? Should I banish her completely and say that we shouldn't read anything that she does? Or should I kind of like see what's happening? Where does it come from, those problematic elements? So as I read more of her work, for example, I discovered that her husband and her later published a comic called Fuego, which is about the Haitian Revolution. And it's fascinating to get a 700-issue comic book about the Haitian Revolution. Like when I tell people in Black Studies, oh, do you know that exists? They're like, oh my God, the comic about the Haitian Revolution that lasted 700 issues. So she did that. That is a positive comic book. She also did produce a comic book about the conquest of South Africa that is very critical of Europe. No? So she actually did comics that were fighting racism, and ideologically they're very interesting. But then she still has Meming, which is kind of like a black mark in her career. I don't know if I'm trying to imitate. Did you see Taylor Swift in the Grammys? When she announced her new record in the awards. So one of the things that I can announce now is that the son of Yolanda Vargas wants me to write a book about her mother to kind of like explain how her comics work. So that will be my next project during the next year. Now, the last thing, so I can come back for that. Now, one of the things that is interesting that I wanted to show you to finish this presentation is that the Mexican-American community, they had a lot of issues when Meming was condemned by the American media because they liked the comic book, and then suddenly everyone was saying, Mexicans are racist because they like the comic book. But, for example, the most famous Mexican-American comic book artists, their names are Jaime and Gilbert Hernandez, they actually address Meming in their comic book. So, for example, when they did the comic book Poison River, they actually criticized the fact that Meming is the biggest character in Mexico. So when you're reading, it was interesting because when I was in grad school and I was reading this, none of the grad students got the Meming reference because they hadn't read Meming. So they're like, why are they reading this black kid character? But it was because it's a reference to that comic book. So you can see that in the American comic book that these Mexican-American writers are doing, they're actually very annoyed by the fact that Meming is a huge success in Mexico and that this racist character is selling so much merchandise and comic books. You can see that every time that there is a violent scene, you can see Meming in the background because suddenly Meming becomes a metaphor for that capitalist system that is going to Mexico and is bringing all that violence, etc. You can see references all throughout the comic book. The character is there. Look at this violent thing, and then there is a... So my point is that Mexican American artists are self-aware about the problems of the main character. And so to me, this is fascinating because it's this idea the racist minstrel comic book art is developed in the US, then it gets exported to other countries in the world, and then suddenly Meming is coming into the US through the Mexican American audience, so it's almost like if the US is importing back the racism itself that they had exported. and so that's why when we discuss this type of racist narrative, we also need to think in terms of the corporate infrastructure that is around the world. And that's the one that keeps those racist narrative going around the world. So now to finalize this, the only thing that I wanted to mention, and that is related to what we will be discussing with Barbara later, is that the main things that we need to do is that we need more comic book creators that come from marginalized communities so that they can establish their voice and not be represented only through the hegemonic art, okay? So we need more people. Now, that diversity doesn't mean that it changes the politics of the nation, because BIPOC people don't have a homogeneous ideology. So part of it is also getting educated about how this imperial culture affect those construction of race, etc. And then the other thing that we need is that we need to support financially the anti-racist work in education. And that means the universities need to put money in it, the corporations need to put money on it, and we ourselves need to support anti-racist creators and narratives. That money needs to come from us. We need to support these people. It cannot just, this deconstruction of racism is not going to appear out of thin air. So we have a role in it. Because at the end, we don't want, I know that sometimes I heard some people saying we need to make the US great again, but that doesn't happen by going back to 19th century imperialism. We need to go to the future, where we develop like a new society where everyone has access to these narratives, and our kids learn from the beginning that concepts of equality, okay? So anyway, thanks for listening to me. I hope you enjoy me being the opening band here.
Thank you. We did it. We're here.
Nobody fell.
Yeah.
That's good.
It was so quiet. Hi.
Yeah, I know. But thank you again. It's been about 1.5 years that we've been working on this idea. And, there's a lot of people to thank, and we will be doing that. But I just wanted to let you know that we're going to have a casual conversation about the exhibit. Some of you already heard some of the initial discussion that we had as Tara was giving us a tour, right? So it's going to be about 25 minutes. And I think what I'll do is I'll start off with just asking if you could tell us a little bit about your childhood. Maybe I'll start with you, Barbara. Yeah.
Okay.
Can you talk about what it was like as a child of a cartoonist? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So my dad was a cartoonist, and he was an animator. And, he was. I was immersed in it. Didn't seem odd to me. That was what my family was like. My sister can attest to that. My dad was always drawing, and his 9 to 5 was as a animator. He went to the city and worked at Bray Studios, and I can remember being young, and like a teacher said, everybody write down their names and write down their parents' occupation. I think they just asked about the father, and I was glad to be able to spell animators, like animator. Nobody knew what it was. I couldn't really explain it, but I knew he drew. So there was always paper, pen, all kinds of things, markers. I destroyed his markers because my friend Leslie had a leg operation, and I did all these drawings on her cast, and my dad was mortified. Yeah. I was like, but it was just part of my life, of did I think I was going to be a cartoonist? Absolutely not. You know, at some point, my dad was also a Mr. Beebe on a children's show. It was a local show, and so he was doing illustrations for that, and he was a character on that, and he was also doing Luther by then, which was a daily strip. So it was a lot of work, and he got me to put on the Zipatone, which later became Letratone, but while he was doing it with Zipatone, and he gave my brother and I a test. I won. My brother fishes, and he's an educator. but I, you know, I could draw, and I could handle a pen, and I could handle an X-Acto blade. So I got the gig. But even with all that, knowing that I was, you know, basically getting trained to be a cartoonist, I knew what it would take to be a cartoonist. I did not think I would be one. I went to Syracuse University, their School of Art. I only applied to Syracuse. I was like, let's see, I'm going to go there. I was accepted. I was the only black, no, it was two, me and Donna, two black girls in my class in the School of Visual and Performing Arts. And it was very isolating, and it was a little scary. But Syracuse was so huge that the black students, we made up like a whole campus on our own. You know, we had, had a great time. It was socially. And we had our own, you know, the parties and stuff. That's what I got out of college. But that's terrible, but it's true. It's very true. And
you have to have fun at college.
Yeah. You do.
I hope you're all having fun.
Yeah,
here.
Please, because you get so much out of it socially. I did. I think I was much shyer than I am now. But anyway, so that's what it was like growing up. I didn't think it was anything different than anybody else. Although I can remember a friend of mine from college coming to our house in Long Island. I was born in Brooklyn, grew up on Long Island, and she's like, I've never seen a house with African art on the walls. I was like, what? Everybody doesn't have this? You know, it's like we had it. Apparently, our home was a little different than what the average person had or experienced. We had. I was talking to my cousin and other people about how when you see the exhibit, there's the 7 Deadly Sins, and my dad would have his work up in the house. So the 7 Deadly Sins was in our dining room. It was up all the time. So that was the kind of stuff he kind of taught me how to think, you know, about issues like that. So I was very aware of racism and the struggle, and you know, it just was second nature to my experience growing up. And people would, you know, I didn't know what I was going to be. I didn't know what I was going to do. I left Syracuse without a degree. Sorry, Mom. I was there 4 years. I took all kinds of classes. I had enough.
Nobody tell her.
Yeah, I needed a guidance counselor. I needed somebody to hold my hand and explain to me what I needed where. But, you know, so then I'm trying to get a job, and the woman I was talking to, she asked me if I could come up with a cartoon. And I said, yeah, because I had seen it done. And I had access to my dad's studio in the basement. He had built a studio in the basement by then. And I came up with an idea that she liked. And it just, you know, like a light bulb went off. It was like a way to express myself. And it was a way to say all the things that I wanted to say, that, you know, I'm not that comfortable certainly talking in front of a lot of people and about heavy things, but I have a lot of heavy ideas. And I just wanted to be able to put it out. So it helped to see how my dad showed or made sense of complex issues of race and everything else. So that's how I became. Was that the question?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
No, thank you. Thank you. And I'd like to ask Tara, you grew up in a home with 2 parents who were artists.
Yeah, active artists.
Yes.
My mother was a stone carver, printmaker, so grew up with a lot of machines in the house despite living in the middle of Manhattan. And we had a table saw for my father, and they were both working constantly, so that was something I was exposed to. And my mother also is a curator, and we've done a lot of international exhibitions and competitions together. We currently have a medallic art competition going that's international, so it's separate. But yeah, there was just art in my life, and I was avid comic book reader since I was a kid, and so, which is separate from comic strips. My parents bought the New York Times. There's no cartoons in that. I was devastated, and yeah, so I've been exposed to art a lot in my life, and I had free reign to collect, and then also I was always saving things and putting things up on the walls and stringing toys across my room. And so I guess I hadn't really thought about it until you just asked the question, like, what was your childhood like? But that was maybe like my early curation, right? Like just going crazy on the walls, collecting things, putting things up.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah.
And can you tell us how the two of you met?
I reached out to Barbara. I was curating an exhibition on women cartoonists and female characters, and it was something that I was doing to challenge myself because I had been revisiting sort of the same creators and characters, and it was very male-centric, white-centric. And I was annoyed with myself because in college there was the Four Immigrants manga had recently been published, so that was in the late 1990s, and there was a book of early cartoons by Dr. Seuss that had come out showing his racist depictions of Asians in the United States, of black people in the United States, and so these were ideas that I had been reading about and grappling with, but yet sort of wasn't acknowledging in exhibitions that I was putting together. So I was doing some research. Trina Robbins, who's a well-known cartoonist here in the United States, underground comics in the 70s, had written a book on female cartoonists, and I was reading through it, and I was like, Barbara, this work is very familiar. I've seen this, and I had seen it, I think, in the Village Voice. That would have been, is that right?
Probably not. No,
just making stuff up. So I had seen it for sure, and I looked Barbara up, and I reached out to her,
yeah. And this was after my my syndication ended in 2005. So when
2011, I think it was.
2005.
2005.
No, I'm saying that I reached out to you.
Yeah. So it had been quite a long time, you know, and I was like, what? You know, she's like, she was putting together a show, and she was interested in my work, and I said, I haven't done anything in 100 years, and she was like, we can show what you've already done, and I was like, hey. That's easy. You know, here's the button. That was easy.
Well, but it was also, right, like I asked if you could send a reproduction, right?
Yes.
So it was very much like a relationship building early on to be part of this group show. And then as I continued to curate group shows,
she's very kind, and she would always come to me really respectfully, and I'm like, really? And she would just coax me into, you know, knowing that this is something that you can do. This is something that we should show. This is something that's important. This is your work is, you know. So as you've heard, I'm the first black woman to have a comic strip in the mainstream press. I crossed the color line. So here's a black hand drawing black characters that are women, and she was like, "This is important. This needs to be out there, and people need to know about it." And I was
other creators need to know about it, not just, you know, people who are also readers. And so I'm going to be honest, like seeing a lot of the stuff that Professor Garcia had on the screen, like that was a lot to see it so large and see it so prominent. And we've seen so many images like that over time.
Yes.
And the thing that I really love about Barbara's work and your father's work is that it's Black people being represented by Black people, and issues that are being addressed very respectfully and honestly. And I thought it was interesting, like Chancellor May mentioned that there's a gentleness or a welcomingness to Mr. Brandon's work from the Black press, and if you go in the exhibit, you'll see many representations of that, such as the 7 Deadly Sins.
Yes.
But that's not something that I think would be published in the mainstream press, right? Like I think that
Would
was
not,
something,
sure. Yeah.
certainly not in the 60s, certainly not in the 70s.
Right.
Even now, right, like you don't see that
That
type,
kind of
yeah.
thing, you don't. Yeah.
And you had a great publisher. Sorry, I think I've gone off the topic.
No, you.
But you had a publisher who was welcoming, and,
Yes.
and unless you have a publisher or somebody backing you like that,
Yeah. I had a syndicate that was, the head of the syndicate was Lee Salem. You know, God rest his soul.
and who else did he bring?
Oh, well, Universal Press was, you know, huge. You know, Ziggy and Calvin and Hobbes and Gary Trudeau. I mean, Doonesbury.
Doonesbury, yeah.
Yeah, and later
Boondocks.
Right, yeah. But Lee Salem was a champion of my work, and this wouldn't have happened without him. And I have a book, and on the page where I say, were it not for these people, Lee is one of them, and if were it not for Drawn and Quarterly, who approached me, you know, 3 years ago or whatever, to say, we want to do a book of your work. And I was like, really? I was like, and they did a wonderful book. It's available at the bookstore. No.
Buy my CD.
Yeah, like Taylor Swift. Like,
Can you tell us a little bit more about the comic strip itself?
Yes.
The characters and the art style.
Yes. So so this when I was initially when I put it together, it was for a magazine, and my plan was to do Black women's points of view. So that's hence where I'm coming from. So each in my mind, each issue would have a different Black woman speaking her mind, and the editor-in-chief was like, "We love it." I was like, "You do," and I thought that's what was going to happen, and then the magazine folded. So I had this idea, and I sent it to Essence. I was like, another Black women's magazine, still not believing or realizing that it's possible for my work to be in the mainstream. You know, I was still the Black press. It was a Black press. Elan was the magazine that I started it for. I sent it to Essence. They were, they said, "Oh, this is good, but we don't want to put a comic in the magazine. It doesn't fit our. What do you do? Because since you're not making it as a cartoonist," which I wasn't, and but I was a fashion writer for a trade publication, and they needed a fashion writer, a fashion and beauty writer who was getting ready to go on maternity leave. So I got the gig, you know, and so there I had these cartoons, this idea for a cartoon. And my dad got a letter from Detroit Free Press, 6 years later. My dad got and he said, and they in the letter they said, "We are trying to have our paper reflect our community. Do you know of any Black cartoonists? We're having a hard time finding Black cartoonists that are suited for our newspaper." And he came to me and said, "Are you going to talk about being a cartoonist? Are you going to do it?" And I was like, "I'm going to do it." And I sent them the very same strips that I created for Elan so many years before, and they liked it. And I had a champion there. Her name was Marty Claus. And I became I had a weekly spot in the in Detroit Free Press. But knowing the business of newspaper cartoonists, you need a syndicate. There's no way, because one newspaper is not going to make it. I can't live on $75 a week somehow. You just can't. So it's like I need a syndicate, and I knew, because I knew that the industry, that what syndicates do is put together press kits on the strips that they have, and send it out to newspapers, and that's how they try to sell. So I put a press kit together on my strip. I was already published. I could show it. I could even show letters from people. What they thought about my strip, and which was the positive ones. I got some not so fan letters too, but the positive ones I put in my own press kit. I sent it out to all the King Features, Universal Press, all the big ones that I figured out. Even my dad's syndicate, because my dad was, his Luther was over in 86, so that was, but I sent it to Los Angeles Times Syndicate, and I still have their rejection letter. So, but I
Wait, what did you put on the top of the press kit?
So my letter said that something like what did I say?
It's like 1990 and still
and we still don't have any black women cartoonists. You know, I said you have some black cartoonists, but none of them have been women. So I kind of put them on blast. You know, I kind of was
like big bold letters.
Yeah,
at
it was
the top
like a
of the
headline
letter,
on my
yeah.
letter. You know, and it's just to get their attention. And I got rejected by everybody, except for, you know, King Features actually sent me a long rejection letter, which I thought was kind. You know, it was like, I mean, kind in the sense that it wasn't a boilerplate. You know, it wasn't like, oh, you know. So there it was. And Universal Press Syndicate, Lee Salem, said he liked it. Let's see what we can do. And they gave me a development deal. And this is, you know, they gave me a development deal whereby you send in pencils of a strip each week. They want to see if you can keep up the continuity. And but I was already doing it for Detroit, so I would pencil it in, ink it in, send it to Detroit, and send the pencil to Universal Press. And
what was the turnaround? If there was a current event happening, like how quickly could you?
So it was, I had to be 2 weeks ahead. So, which, you know, not like a daily, which is a lot of strips. I had to do 2 strips every other week. I was liking that. That was my pace. Yeah, it was good. Yeah.
So I want to talk about the exhibit a little bit. I'll talk about some of the pieces that stand out to me, and then maybe if we have time, we can get into some additional ones. But one of my favorite ones is the Obama piece.
Yeah.
And I really especially like it because your father was still creating all that time.
My dad couldn't help himself. My dad was diagnosed with Parkinson's in 2002, and but he did so much work. He did. He couldn't help himself. You know, he worked constantly. Before, after Luther, he did for the Black Press. He did for himself. He did a whole series of single line drawings and paintings, and he did sculptures. He just couldn't help himself. But once Parkinson's hit, it was hard for him. You know, his brain was sharp, but he could not do it. So he started doing collages and mosaics. Kind of, you cut out paper and paste it down. He tried some things on the computer.
And then he also did he has a whole kids book on races, like how slavery in the United States through the civil rights movement.
What We Overcame was the name of that, and it was a whole education for young people to understand what we overcame or what we were trying to overcome.
And he was always curriculum building as well. There's like a bunch of slides that have like silhouette images, and but we don't have the script for it. So there's just like a lot of content. He did things for kids. He did things for adults. A lot of different age groups.
But I think his main purpose, what he felt very strongly about, was educating people about race. And he wrote in one publication that he's trying to it's kind of twofold. He's trying to educate the white reader about what our experience is, and he was also trying to educate the black reader, who we can be filled with rage and we aren't able to articulate what is bothering us. And so he felt that he could do strips and cartoons that expressed the kind of thing that we're going through, and why it is something that is upsetting. It was just a way of articulating the many facets of racism.
Thank you. Can we talk also about the board game? Because the colored board game. Yeah.
That was the name of our first exhibit together. So we did that bunch of years ago, but it was the first one. It was it was really important to start there, I think, because it encapsulated, I think, the work that the messaging that your father focused on so much. Yeah.
So that was 1967. My dad created this board game. 1967, I was 9, 8, whatever, something like that.
And thinking about the time period, right? Like what was happening in the United States, like the civil rights movement was really like reaching peaks. The Vietnam War was happening, and
cities were on fire. Yes, yeah, and it was a time to. And the game, it was a game board that you play, but you can't win. It's a black experience, and colored is we used to call black. We went from different names, Negroes, colored, but we would say colored. That's hence the name colored. It's the way it's usually said instead of colored, and so it's a game, and you had to you can play it at the exhibit. And you can't win it because that's just what our experience has been, and that's it fits very well into the still idea.
And then even if some of the squares are not completely relevant now, right? You can think about what is the parallel now. You can replace a lot of the squares that might feel a little outdated, like Cadillac maybe, right? Or whatever. You can replace
People still
those.
drive Cadillacs.
Yeah. This is true.
Did you ever play the colored game with your brother or your sister, or did you have people coming over as visitors playing the game? What?
Sure, we did, and we as the kids helped him put together. He got boxes that you put together, and there were 4 game boards that you put in there, and he had pieces, and so it was kind of like helping him put this whole thing together. It was, very basic stuff that he had us help do. And my friend Leslie, who I've known since the beginning of time, we would try to play it often and try to win. We're like, we can do it. You know what? Can't win. That's impossible. And it was definitely possible.
And can you talk a little bit about, because your strip ended in 2005, but you're still producing comics today. Can you let us know about some of those and the inspiration for them?
Yeah, and some of the more recent ones that I've done are in this exhibit, and they are. I don't have a syndicate now. My syndication ended, so I put it out on Instagram, which is my very creative handle of Barbara Brandon-Croft. That's if you want to go to Instagram and see. But I also did it on Facebook, but it was just a. I'm going to say Tara was the one who kept saying to me, "You can still do it. Why don't you still do it?" And I was like, By this time, I was working at Parents Magazine. I was a research director. It was a busy, heavy job. I got married. I had a kid. Busy time. And I was like, I don't know if I can do it. And then Tara was like, "Why don't we take some pictures of your old." That's not how you say
scans.
It. Scans, yeah. So scans of your old work and take out the words, and you can change the words up. And
Barbara has really great handwriting. Like at her office, like all the files had her handwriting, and I was like, "Oh, this is fantastic."
Yeah. So I could work some of the old drawings, and but it wasn't until somebody came down with that escalator, and I was like, wait a minute. It started bubbling up in me. And so the very first strip I did was from what Tara had cut out. Had given me a scan of, and I reworked. I used just a column of it because mine was this big. Kind of expression.
So,
like,
so most of Barbara's stuff was 6, right? 6.
6. Yeah,
different
or
panels.
2 people.
Yeah. But and this was just a 2, like a stack of.
So I used that, and I did the first one, which is in the exhibit.
So they put white supremacy on the ballot.
And guess what happened? Yeah. And hashtag Obama backlash. But I just had to do it, and I can remember coming home and telling my son that I showed him the strip, and he's like, when did you do that? I was like, on the job. It's like, I was like, sorry about that manuscript. No, I had to do it, and the first time that I was able to get back, I don't know if that's not the right way to phrase it, but the first time I was in a publication again was the Washington Post picked up one of my strips that, and I'm not getting paid. I just put it out as stuff that hits me and I have to say it. Somebody from the Washington Post saw it and they put it in the Washington Post, and that one's in there as well. And that was after the George Floyd verdict.
So something that's really important to me as a reader and also as a curator is that Barbara she puts pen on paper. So that means that we get to have originals, and almost everything in the exhibit is an original piece that was either done by you or your father, obviously, but that's time. That's a lot of time. I don't know if anybody here is a cartoonist or anybody here draws, or if there's anybody here who takes notes by hand and isn't always typing. There's something really warming about seeing actual ink on paper. And it's an artifact, right? These are things that we can look at, and it's not just something that we swipe past. It's like something that we can tangibly hold, and that's something that I love about old comics as well, or comic strips and papers. It has this like added level of engagement with us as a reader, right? We're holding, we're maybe putting it in a drawer because we don't want to throw it away. We're passing it along to somebody else. We're putting something on a refrigerator, something very tangible that continues to exist and resonate with us, as opposed to something that we know we have a file of or a scan of somewhere. And so that's something.
Never find. Yeah.
Yeah, and like it's something that I really like. I lament. I know a number of cartoonists, people when they move just to digital. I ask them sometimes, like, I want something physical on paper. Like, can you do a little sketch for me? And there's something very meaningful about thinking about somebody like really just spending that time and handing this thing that they've made to you, or whether it's reproductions that can work as well. But yeah, I just really appreciate that you still use pen and paper. Yeah.
And I'll ask this last one, something that we really appreciated too. Can you tell us about the MoMA mini memoir?
Yes.
Yes, please.
Yeah. So this is something else you guys can find, but
and MoMA, Museum of Modern Art.
Museum of Modern Art reached out to my publisher and said they were interested in me. My publisher also does Linda Barry, and I forgot the third person. They were interested in for their digital magazine, which is called MoMA in Design, or Design for MoMA, something like that, .org. I guess you can find it some kind of way. But they asked me if I could do a cartoon, and I was like, you don't want to use something I already have, because that's just me. But I was like, okay, this is something I've never done before, and I am now in a place where I'm like, I need to stretch, I need to try to do some other things. And I agreed to, so they asked me to send a script. And I sent a script, I called it a mini memoir, and they liked it. So I worked on it and worked on it and worked on it. And what makes me laugh is that sometimes people say, how do you know when you're done? I was like, when it's due.
Yeah, right?
It was due.
Students, papers, yeah.
I was like, I knew. When I look at it now, I was like, there's so many corrections, and there's so many things that I would do to change it. But it was due, so it's out there. So you guys can check it out, and you can see what my childhood was like a little bit, and how everything happened.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I want to thank Tara and Barbara for sitting with us. Can you please join me?
Oh, thanks. Thank you for having us. Thank you for bringing us out.
Let's take
So yes, a big thank you to our speakers this evening, and thank you to all of you for being here. The evening still continues. There will be a reception outside of the room here if you'd like to join us, and you can ask questions of our speakers. I'm sure they'd be happy to answer those for you. And the museum will remain open. I see Trevor's over there, so until he falls asleep, which may be, 8:30 or so. So if you'd like to go down to the museum as well and check out the exhibit, please do so. Again, thanks to everybody, and thank you again for being here.